Hello, HERstorians. I'm your host, Heather Ashley, and welcome to another episode of Women of HERstory, a podcast dedicated to celebrating women who have made or are making their mark on our society. Give a big howdy do to your favorite co-host, Cowboy Dave. How goes it on the ranch these days, Cowboy Dave?
Pew, pew! Well, things are mighty fine on this ranch. I'm not gonna do the voice. Things are mighty fine on this ranch. You know, tending to horses, cattle, a lot. And how are you?
I'm doing well. First things first, I'm the realist. No, just kidding.
All right, that's all, folks. We'll see you next week.
And done. And scene. There's a tiny bit of news in case you've been living under a rock. The United States of America has its first ever Madam Vice President in Kamala Harris. So, ladies, make sure your shoes are on because there's glass everywhere.
It hurts. My feet are bleeding. No one told me to wear shoes today. This is the worst day.
Today's HERstory lesson takes place on the other side of the world. We are going to be talking about Egyptian feminist Huda Sha'arawi.
Ooh.
Yeah. Are we ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's hop right in.
Pew, pew.
Pew, pew. Huda was born on June 23rd, 1879 in Al Minya while it was under British protectorate.
Shouts out Geminis. Gemini season.
Get out.
Oh.
Now, this was before the official British occupation of Egypt, just 3 years later in 1882. She was the daughter of Muhammad Sultan Pasha. He was a landowner and he was active in Egyptian politics, and her mother was a Circassian slave. She was raised in Cairo and grew up in an Egyptian harem during a time when upper-class women were required to live in secluded apartments and veil their face in public. Huda was educated in the harem, which was uncommon. She was taught to read the Quran, and she was tutored in Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and Islamic subjects by Muslim female tutors.
Wow, that's so cool.
Isn't that
I love
interesting?
how educated she was, and that she was I'm glad
Some
she was
sort of
able
education.
to. Yeah, I'm glad she was able to have some sort of education in a time when that wasn't so prevalent for women.
Yeah, she was one of the few that were even, educated at all. She was extremely bright, and she wrote poetry in Arabic and French. She grew increasingly frustrated when she realized that she wasn't being awarded the same education as her brother. Isn't that the worst? That's happened a few times in some of the women we've done episodes over, where they're all really excited about their education, and then they realize what their brother's being taught in comparison to what they're being taught. And they're like, oh, well, that's...
Hold my beer.
Yeah.
And then they, go in. Yeah.
In her autobiography, Harem Years, the memoirs of an Egyptian feminist, she talks about how she hated being a girl. She was kept from the education she desired, and later she was being denied the freedoms that she deeply yearned for. She showed her spunky independence at an early age, however, when she entered a department store in Alexandria to buy her clothes instead of having them brought to her house.
There you go.
Yeah, she was like, I can do it myself, thank you.
Moving on up.
Now, Huda was involuntarily wed at the age of 13 to her cousin, Ali Sha'arawi, a man 40 years her senior who was already married. Now, she felt compelled to agree or risk dishonoring her family. As I mentioned before, she was extremely bright, and she stipulated in her marriage contract that monogamy must be a condition to the marriage. And Mr. Grosspants continued to see his first wife, and the two were then estranged.
Wait, so they had a contract?
Yeah, and she was like,
was
listen,
there such a thing as a prenup before this?
It's not a prenup, it's a marriage contract.
Was there I'm just
surprised that she had a say in it at all.
I'm very much two things. I'm very tickled by the fact that there was paperwork, like documentation that she was able to have a say in. And two, the fact that As a 13-year-old, she was
She
able
was thinking like that. She was like,
even,
all right.
I don't even think I knew fully what I enjoyed eating at 13. Like, I'm pretty sure I was like salad sucks, chicken nuggets all the way, and brownies for the rest of time.
She's like, okay, how can I sort of get out of this without dishonoring my family? Okay, we're going to say monogamy, and then I'm going to catch him sleeping with his first wife, and then that is going to be grounds for me to not have to be... She's still married to him, but estranged. Yeah.
Customs and traditions are just very interesting.
She used the next 7 years of her life to advance her studies and become active in her community. In 1900, after pressure from her family, she reconciled with her husband... I'm sorry.
Didn't know if you did that. That's so good.
She reconciled with... I'm not, like...
Wow.
We're not
I'm so
dissing
impressed
anyone's
with her wordplay.
traditions, but also, like, you shouldn't ever marry your cousin.
She snuck that in there. That was so funny. I looked at her like maybe she made a mistake.
No.
Wow.
That was real.
Mm-hmm.
The two had a daughter, Buthania, in 1902, and a son, Muhammad, in 1905. Any extra toes?
And you, like, smiled at me, too, when you said it. You're like, husband, and then you looked at me like, see what I did there? That's great.
The couple became important social and political figures in Egypt in the 20th century. Ali was a founding member of the Waft Party, Egypt's nationalist party, and Huda was a developing activist. In 1909, Huda helped to create the first secular philanthropic organization operated by Egyptian women.
Awesome.
I know. She argued that women-run social service projects were important for two reasons. First, that by engaging in projects, women would be able to expand their horizons and acquire practical knowledge and further be able to direct their focus outward.
And two, duh.
And second, she wanted to challenge the idea that all women are creatures of pleasure and beings in need of protection.
I mean, yeah. Like,
yeah, it's still...
She's like, here are two reasons why these things, like, this makes sense. And it's like, she just gave, like, the most,
they were like...
She gave the most, like... She's like, and she might as well be like, here are the reasons why humans need oxygen. One,
yeah.
It's necessary. Two, you need it.
And it's just so crazy to think about times when, and even still today, that those arguments are having to be made. Like, no, it's just right to allow people... an entire half of the population to participate in these things.
It's actually even worse now, because you would think after all this time and knowledge and history that people would be able to learn, but if anything, they really hunker down on their beliefs, and they're like, well, I mean, it's been this way since the beginning of time, and it's like, that's not a good reason at all for anything.
Yeah, it's not great. In 1914, Huda founded the Union of Educated Egyptian Women, and that same year, she traveled to Europe for the first time. She worked across the class line to demonstrate against British occupation. Huda shared that encounters with various prominent female thinkers helped to shape her feminist outlook. One being Eugenie Lebrun, the wife of Egyptian Prime Minister Hussein Rushdie Pasha, and Marguerite Thomas Clement, a women's rights activist and politician from Luxembourg. She expressed that the concept of women's rights could be found in the tenets of Islam. Early on, Huda saw she could look to Islam to demand more rights for women. So, in this sense, she preceded what we now call the Muslim feminist movement. Emeritus professor at the University Paris Diderot, Sonia Diane Hersbrun, said this to Le Monde Afrique. I can do the French pronunciation sometimes.
No, it's good.
As time went on, Huda became increasingly bolder in her activism. In 1919, she helped organize the first and largest anti-colonial women's demonstration. It was called the March of Veiled Women. They took to the streets of Cairo to protest British colonial rule and to foil, quote, a British plan to exile 4 Egyptian nationalist leaders, including her husband.
Man.
In 1920, Huda founded the Waftist Women's Central Committee and subsequently served as its president. Finally, after years of protests, Britain granted Egypt their independence in 1922.
Wow.
After they had already taken away their independence and gave it back. It's
Yeah. How does that work?
Though, like, what is that? You're just giving back what was already mine? But okay. Though Britain still retained a great deal of control afterwards. Despite Egyptian women being heavily involved in the struggle for Egypt's independence, they were not invited to participate with their male counterparts in negotiations with the British.
Gross.
Following Egypt's independence, they denied women's suffrage. Yeah. Nevertheless, she submitted a list of 32 nationalist and feminist demands that were completely ignored.
I'm glad she did it, though.
Yeah,
to set that precedent. Okay. She was like, well, I'm just going to do this because no one else is doing this, and this needs to be done, and if it doesn't, then no one's going to say anything.
Mm-hmm. Huda kept an open engagement with Egypt's nationalist movement. She was able to negotiate, quote, maximum dividends with her upper-class status and alliances with men who also held similar ideas surrounding the class divide, ideologies, and politics for the benefit of the feminist nationalist ideals she held.
It's those well-educated men that are like... Oh.
These men were initially uncomfortable with the, quote, liberation of women, as they called it at the time. But she was able to convince them that supporting her movement would fit the image of themselves that they had held as civilized people from civilized nations.
Oh, man. They're not... Oh.
Yeah.
Damn.
They're not as woke as you want them to be.
No, well...
But she kind of... She's very smart. I have... It's so good. So the language she used in her demands used the reason a feminist program was needed was not because it was innately correct, but because Egypt needed to, quote, reach a level of glory and might like that reached by civilized nations.
Right. It's like stroking their ego.
They also
almost.
Don't know that that wasn't even happening in the, quote, civilized nations. Women had just gotten the right to vote.
I like that you almost sang that. I like that you almost decided to put a melody behind that.
I'm going to write a whole musical.
That. Doesn't need to happen in this case, but I understand. It's so weird, though.
Yeah. And the agenda was validated then by the, quote, spirit of religion as a secondary justification. And this was an excellent strategy. She knew to try to find common ground with the Muslims, with the men and women, so that she could help build a successful Egyptian nation state in a way that also included women, although they were still ignored, of course, even with a handful of people on their side. They were making a few strides, but
she played to her strength. He played to her strengths and their weaknesses because she knew that in order to unify, or in order she had to play that sort of card where it was this would be the betterment of the country if women also
people aren't gonna look at us as uncivilized.
Wouldn't it be cool if we all kind of looked like we were coming up, right? Even if maybe we weren't all, but everyone else thought we were all kind of coming up, then it'd be wow,
it's so
Egypt's
weird.
Coming up.
Yeah.
But
it's very interesting.
She's the ultimate hustler.
Yeah. After her husband's death in 1923, Huda shifted her focus from anti-colonialism to women's equality. Later that year, she created and served as the president of the Egyptian Feminist Union, or EFU. She sought to achieve women's suffrage, reform Egypt's personal status laws, and to expand educational opportunities for girls and women. And something interesting to note is that there is actually no direct translation in Arabic for the term feminist. EFU women used the French term féministe. In French was the language of the upper class. So, as I'm sure you've noticed, there's a theme of the class divide throughout this episode.
I like that they use the French term, though. Yeah. It's interesting.
I didn't realize there wasn't a direct translation, which, interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting to think about. Because people argue about certain terms, and it's some places don't even recognize
that as a word
of the
it's
word,
not even in
let
the
alone
vocabulary.
The ending of the word.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. That's just not even in there. They use another term entirely,
and there's not even a similar term in Arabic. At least not at the time. That's why they went by the EFU. 1923 was a year of action for Huda as she attended the International Women's Suffrage Alliance in Rome.
Cool.
In a speech she gave, she argues her conception of Egyptian feminism. 2 key points being, women in ancient Egypt had equal status to men, and it was under foreign domination that women had lost those rights. And that Islam granted women equal rights to men, but that the Quran had been misinterpreted by men in power. Hashtag shocked. Isn't that true of all religion? Hot takes with Heather.
Damn. Yeah, no, I mean, that just seems, they were like, in other news,
Yeah.
the sky is blue,
Yeah.
men misinterpret laws for their own gains and personal power.
Yeah.
And the sun rises. It's like, no, that's, as far back as religion goes, there's always been a group of people, men,
willing,
who have just kind
absolutely
of been in
taken
power.
it and just said, well, this is what this means, and
Religion's
it puts me in a
funky
position
like
of
that.
power. Yeah,
Religion's real weird like
so that's
that.
gonna be that should be like
Religion
we're gonna
is,
start a new podcast, Hot Takes with Heather.
that doesn't sound like a me thing. That sounds like you, where you just spit
No.
for 10 minutes, like angry. Angry. You're not even angry, just really passionate.
I can just read any news article and just give a hot take to it.
Really bust my
Counterpoints.
chops. Oh,
I'm good at those
counterpoints. Goodness.
So when she returned to Egypt from the conference, she performed one of her most memorable acts of protest. She stood outside of the Cairo train station, removed her face and head covering, and encouraged other women around her to do the same. This act depicted 2 very different aspects of her life. One within the conventions of the harem system that she grew up in, and one as the leader of a women's movement. Her friend and colleague, Sessa Nabaroui, said, "We can't say we are free in Rome and then wear the veil again upon our return to Egypt." She suggested that the death of her father and the death of Huda's husband emboldened the women to carry out such a, quote, radical act.
That's great. I love that they just took that.
Yeah, they were like,
Ran with
okay.
it.
Egyptian women in rural and poor urban areas didn't cover their face, only their heads. According to Professor HERstory from earlier, the face veil was a symbol of privilege. It was not a religious one. The hijab is a covering worn by many Muslim women. It's a symbol of conflicts surrounding culture and collective identity in the Arab world from late colonial to post-colonial periods. That's when the meaning behind the hijab just kind of got wishy-washy. It meant something before, and then colonizers came in and kind of ruined everything. Shocking. Proponents and attackers assign good or evil to its essential meaning without considering that it can be both or neither, and that the meaning has shifted drastically within historical context. Some say Huda, quote, removed the curtain behind the way upper-class households seclude its women. And by removing the veil, she dropped the symbolic barrier that denied these women full access to public life. She said that by donning the hijab in the first place, she had grounded herself in Islam and Arabic culture, and therefore could claim the right to interpret that culture anew with authority and legitimacy.
Yes.
Yeah. And some people say that Huda's act was radical or even un-Islamic. But by stripping her head and face cover, she was removing a notion in Egyptian society that they represented, class divisiveness. And it helped in restoring it to a personal religious choice. You know, her whole thing is like, you're not just, it's up to you how you identify with this symbol, and it needs to be the power needs to be put back into the woman's hands. If she wants to wear it for her religious purposes, that does not make her not a feminist.
It's really
that just makes her making her own choices.
It's really just the worst thing when people impose their religion on you to the point where they're like, infringing on her rights as a human being. You know, the fact that she is like the clutch my pearls type of people who thought she was so radical for her like interpretation.
Oh,
like
how she's like, you don't know what I've
you
been
kidding
through.
me? Like, are you kidding me?
She's like, it does not make me less of a Muslim woman.
That's so disrespectful to like the individual as a human being. Like, if you care that much about a person and want to say something about how like the way they're living, take into consideration what they've been through before, and just kind of assume that maybe they've either thought about it or like they're just it's just not for them. That's just so disrespectful.
Like it's
and whack.
just been you don't understand what decisions the decision someone has made to like not wear it or to wear it.
It's a belief system. You can't. You're disrespecting. You're basically disrespecting the ideologies.
Yeah.
Like when you forcefully impose yourself like that to the point where, like, you know, they were criticizing her for.
Yeah, and she's like,
X,
just
Y,
the fact
Z.
that I wear it in the first place and have literally, this is my whole life.
This is my
what
attire.
Are you talking about?
These are my like.
This
is my clothes.
And she's like,
please,
I'm doing this so
be.
that I can assign my own meaning to it, not because I'm, and you know, she wanted to remove the class divide, to remove these things. And throughout this time, Huda was continuing her efforts with the Waft Party, trying to gain ground within the government for women's rights. It is completely unjust that the Egyptian Waft, which fights for the right of Egypt and its liberation, denies half of the population the gains made from this liberation. Huda wrote this in a letter to Saad Zaghloul, the leader of the Waft Party and Prime Minister of Egypt, in 1924. Huda led pickets of Egyptian women at the opening of Parliament in January.
Wow.
In January of 1924, after the government announced that it had banned women from its opening. Shortly after these events, Huda resigned from the Waftist Women's Central Committee, no doubt out of absolute frustration. She then put her focus onto the EFU. Huda's friend Nabarui said, in December 1924, we established 16 as the minimum age for marriage for women. We founded the first secondary school for young women. In 1933, we celebrated the first women university graduates.
Wow.
Making moves.
1933.
Mm-hmm. The EFU launched one of Egypt's first feminist journals in French in 1925 called L'Egyptienne. 2 years later, they launched Al Merizia, I'm so sorry, the Arabic edition of the publication. Huda was instrumental in 1944 in convening the first Arab Feminist Union, as the EFU had become weary of the Western feminists. They called for unity and solidarity with the Arabs of Palestine. While she had officially left the Waft Party, that didn't mean she wasn't continually fighting for the Egypt she believed in. She proposed the internationalization of the Suez Canal, and in 1945, she received the highest decoration from the Egyptian state. It is the Nishan al-Kamal, for services rendered to the country. They recognized her for her struggles for gender equality and national liberation, which is freaking ironic because it literally withheld from her political rights. It was a system of contradictions with which she and other women had to live. Like literally, they're like, here's this award for fighting for women's rights, but like you still don't get any rights.
Yeah, or like here's this award even though we were like thrashing you for years.
Honestly, and it's like it reminds me of when RBG said like hard pass on just sticking a woman's face on some US currency without giving women like additional rights, and it was just symbolic, just a completely symbolic award to say, look, we reward our women who are fighting for justice without actually giving them anything. They're like, Huda died of cholera in 1947 at the age of 68. Wow. And she led the EFU until her death. Shortly before her death, always one to be making waves, she proposed the abolition of nuclear weapons. And truthfully, super on board with that.
Yeah, I was wondering. Yep. I was like,
super.
I was wondering what if she had done.
I'm very sing-songy today,
anything.
but
I know.
Yeah.
See, I pointed that out. Yeah, nuclear weapons. Well, World War II had just started up, or not just started, but they were like, this was
finishing.
This was like years later on. Right, there was like the aftermath, and so.
Oh, yeah, there's just, you know, and.
She was like, maybe we should do.
Yeah, she's like, maybe no one should have that much power.
She's like, I know I was talking about women's rights, but maybe as a human right, no more nuclear weapons.
Yeah, no more nukes, guys. No more nukes.
This is just as much of a human rights thing as it is a feminist thing, guys, if you think about it. Like, we're all dead. So.
Huda published her feminist journal and represented Egypt at women's congresses across the globe. In Graz, Paris, Amsterdam, Berlin, Marseille, Istanbul, Brussels, Budapest, Copenhagen, Interlaken, and Geneva, among just a few, truly. Here's where I get a little ragey. After her death, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser formally banned the women's movement that Huda had founded, though he continued to use her image to represent a dulled-down, government-approved form of feminism, yet another form of symbolic support for a state that offered few rights to their women.
Diet feminism.
Ugh.
Feminism light.
Unfortunately, the small gains that Huda made for gender equality and national liberation in the 20s and 30s have slowly but surely reversed through decades of autocratic rule in Egypt and the rise of political Islam. Scholars say that to understand Huda's feminism and activism, you must consider the context of the anti-colonial and anti-imperialist struggles of the time. They argue that she did not abandon Islam like her critics claim. She was acting and reacting within a multitude of complexities surrounding the times.
Absolutely.
There were tensions she had to negotiate through, accusations that the feminist movement was entirely westernized and inauthentic, and not, you know, just like the need to have rights as a human.
Right.
And she was fighting against leadership and the portrayal of women. Her early assumptions that the experience of a small category of privileged women could represent and speak on the behalf of the experience of all Egyptian women was, troubling. She held a skewed vision of what poor women's lives were. She saw them sort of as passive recipients of social services, not to be consulted about priorities or goals. She thought that the rich were guardians and protectors of the nation. You know, she is seen as a key contributor to the modern Egyptian nation state. She is revered as complex, contradictory, pioneering, and invaluable. She saw that the national struggle for independence in Egypt and the struggle for women's emancipation were inseparable and interdependent. And she's such an interesting woman to me because, you know, while a lot of her critics will say, well, she was full of contradictions. We all are. She very much so. She, you know, her experience as a woman in the upper class, she didn't consider that her experience wouldn't speak for all experiences of women and in Egypt, but she was using the tools she had and the passion that she had and the position she had to try to create a better nation state that included women in its rights, I guess. It included women in its government, in representing them in ways that was not being done.
I mean, yeah, I feel like when marginalized people are trying to, weave through the systems, they end up picking up things from here and there based on, you know, what we're told, and then, when everything kind of coagulates together, it becomes harder for marginalized individuals to be able to fall and make mistakes because it's almost like they
represent an entire, I think
the demographic of people that they represent like already had it hard, and so when they try and succeed and like if they do something, then like if they do something and it's not as well received, then it just looks like it's underwhelming and it's unfortunate. And then when they do something bad, then they get lashed out at even more.
But then when they do something good, they get this award with a
half-assed form of recognition where it's just like like almost like a participation award for like doing your best job, keep up the good work.
Yeah, without any actual action.
And it just kind of seems underhanded.
It is so funny that you say that because the quote I'm closing with, quite a thing that has to do with this.
Lay it on me.
She said, men have singled out women of outstanding merit and put them on pedestals to avoid recognizing the capabilities of all women.
That's so real.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't, I'm not even, it's her, it's a lot of the women that we've talked about. It's a lot of the women we're going to be talking about where, they do extraordinary things and they only get, like, a finite amount of recognition, whereas, like, men in history who have, like, these men, like, there are men in history who have done less, who have gotten more recognition.
Who have done less
claim.
and done really horrible things. And then also everyone's like, yeah, but they contributed to this.
And it's not like their backs are against the wall.
Yeah.
It's like they had a good life and then they contributed this to society. And then now we recognize them for all their merits. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, if, like I keep saying, if a marginalized individual does something, their success might only go so far. Their recognition might only be recognized so much. Their claim might only be reveled in, by a select few groups of communities, because their successes might not have been passed on, might not have been as noteworthy. She's done a lot for women in Egypt, and she is a little controversial, but I definitely think that
I love researching
a lot of these women deserve their flowers, and it sucks they only get like a rose or
it's also like something that she was saying that,
even
like,
after their death they get like one.
She was saying something about, like, her saying, like, they like to single out someone who does something really, really incredible, and then just to avoid recognizing that all women are capable, and that also, for me, what I sort of felt like I saw, at least, I mean, I could have been researching weird, I don't know, but I felt like by the end of her life, she had strayed away from her idea that, like, poor women are there to be aided, like her initial kind of stances, because at the end she's like, literally all these women are capable. Why are you, like, just talking about me? It's very interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you, HERstorians, for tuning in again. Subscribe, tell your friends,
please.
Send out carrier pigeons. Ooh. Yeah.
Ooh.
Bringing those back.
Okay. Or maybe like a rat, like from Harry Potter, Hermione.
Hermione doesn't have a rat.
Ron has a rat. Ron had the... Man,
But it was actually Wormtail.
Yeah, well, just make sure it's not Wormtail. Get a rat that's not Wormtail. I mean, that's just a given.
Get a rat that's not a human pretending to be a rat.
That's just a given.
Yeah,
or get yourself a gibbon.
Come back this Friday for an interview with Sue Thaden, the CEO and founder of From Now On, a Nebraska-based technology company that powers mobile applications for over 80 colleges and conference sporting events in the United States, including the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship, among others. She tells us how she got started, where the idea came from, and so much more. It even has a special appearance from Cowboy Dave.
Pew pew. Howdy, y'all.
Yeah, he co-hosts that interview with me. It's a good one. You guys can follow us on the social media. Twitter at
The HERstory Pod.
Instagram at
Women of HERstory.
And visit our website at
ofherstory.com.
Until Friday, be safe, stay healthy, and show the world what you're made of.
Wear a mask, break glass, bye.